Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 6, 2009, the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Pence, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks in the course of this special order.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I come to the floor tonight with an issue of enormous importance before the American people on my mind, and I'll be joined in just a few moments by distinguished colleagues from around the country who share my profound concern about legislation that has come to be known as cap and trade legislation. It is an effort that is underway here on Capitol Hill and from the Obama administration that could well result in an increase in energy costs for the average American household of more than $3,000 per year. Now, we want to talk about the facts and the data here, because even in newspapers and wire services tonight, that number, which is a calculation of a study done by MIT, is the subject of some dispute and some debate. And I want to concede the point that the impact on the average American household, if the President and the majority's cap and trade bill were to become law, could actually be much higher than that. In fact, it would be President Obama himself, as a candidate in January of 2008, who spoke these words in a meeting with the editorial board of the San Francisco Chronicle. And I would say to any of our citizens that are looking in and are internet savvy, don't take my word for it. Go to youtube.com and type in the President's name and San Francisco Chronicle, and you can watch him say it for yourself. And I give the President, whose office and whose person I respect, credit for candor. In January of 2008, he referred to this plan upon which he was campaigning, and a plan upon which Democrats have now offered legislation, hearings for which begin this week. The President said, and I quote, "Under my plan of cap and trade system, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket," adding, "that will cost money, and they will pass that money on to consumers." Let me say again, while a careful calculation of a study done, I believe in 2007, by a distinguished university, MIT, estimates that the average American household would experience increased energy costs of some $3,128 per year. Then candidate and now President of the United States of America, Barack Obama, said that if his cap and trade system passed into law, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket. Now, last time I checked, which was just late last week, most of this country is going through one of the worst recessions we've experienced in decades. I say with a heavy heart that the people of Indiana recently learned that the unemployment rate in my fair state is now at 10%. The American people are hurting, struggling under the weight of the listing economic fortunes of this nation. And let me say, the last thing I believe the American people want this Congress to do is pass energy legislation in the name of dealing with climate change that could result in, to borrow the President's phrase, a skyrocketing of electricity rates on working families, small business owners, and family farmers. But as I prepare to begin to recognize some of my colleagues, who many of whom have forgotten more about this topic than I will have a chance to learn, I also want to make one more point about this. This legislation, known as the American Clean Energy and Security Act, offered on March 31, 2009 by House Energy and Commerce Chairman Waxman of California and Energy and Environment Subcommittee Chairman Markey, could not only result in this massive energy tax increase, but I want to say if this legislation were to pass into law, it would be tantamount to a declaration of economic war on the Midwest by the liberal majority of this Congress. Now, people who've known me over the last 8 years in this Congress know that I like to turn a phrase, but I don't like to be an alarmist. And so for me to come to the floor of this Congress and say that I believe if the President's cap and trade bill were to become law, it would in effect be a declaration of economic war by liberals in Washington, D.C. on the Midwest, allow me to defend that point. According to a recent study done by the Heritage Foundation, what they call their Manufacturing Vulnerability Index, a picture is worth 1,000 words. This map demonstrates, with the vulnerability being the highest among the dark red colored states and the beige states being the least impacted by the cap and trade legislation, tells the tale. I can't do better than this. So when I say that to pass the cap and trade legislation, which could result in a massive national energy tax, which would fall four square on states that are most dependent on coal-burning power plants for the electricity that we use in our homes and in our small businesses and on our farms, the map tells the tale. The least affected areas on the coast, the West Coast and the Northeast, places like New Jersey, Massachusetts, New York, Maine, and New Hampshire, with a wider diversity of electricity sources of energy, would be the least impacted. Likewise, California, Arizona, Oregon, Washington State, among the least impacted. But the Midwest and my state, which according to this study is virtually ground zero of the impact of cap and trade's economic burden, the coloration of this map tells the tale. States along the Ohio River Valley, states across the, let me say with pride, the heartland of this country, states that depend the most on coal-burning power plants, will bear the greatest burden. And households and small businesses and family farms in that region. A region which, if I can say on a very personal level, is already struggling in these difficult times. As I mentioned, 10% unemployment in the state of Indiana. And my Michigan neighbors who are looking in tonight, forgive me for not knowing the number, but I do know it's worse. And to think that this Congress, even as we speak, would be contemplating a cap and trade piece of legislation that may result in a massive national energy tax increase falling most harshly on the Midwest, is unconscionable. Now let me say one last item before I'm going to yield to a freshman. I'm going to yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, and we'll hear from Utah and from the gentlelady who just spoke. But let me say, Mr. Speaker, you have heard that I've qualified my estimates here, because the truth is that the American Clean Energy and Security legislation offered by the distinguished gentleman from California and gentleman from Massachusetts actually includes no specific numbers on how CO2 emission allowances would be allocated to energy producers. In other words, we don't know whether they'll be free, whether they'll be auctioned, the so-called cap and trade scheme. We don't know what price. Therefore, the bill that is going to be the subject of hearings on Capitol Hill this week provides so little information that the Congressional Budget Office confirmed again today that they cannot score the cap and trade bill. Now, as I told members of the media today, we had a little budget debate a few weeks ago. And I remember Republicans, we came out with a budget alternative. You might remember, Mr. Speaker. And a few days before that, we thought it'd be helpful to put out an outline of that budget alternative. But one of the things, you know, it's a live and learn deal around here. And what I learned was that the media really doesn't appreciate it when Republicans come forward without all the numbers in the proposal. And I've internalized that lesson. And I'm applying it to the Waxman-Markey bill. The truth of the matter is, a non-binding budget resolution is one thing, but legislation that could literally change the economic fortunes of the heartland of America for generations is another. The American people, Mr. Speaker, are entitled to know what all this is going to cost. And we don't know today. Because the bill that will be the subject of hearings, will be the subject of subcommittee markups just in a matter of days, I'm told, may well be on the floor here before we get to Memorial Day weekend, has no numbers. No numbers for us to estimate the impact on the average American family, the average small business owner and family farmer. And that is just not acceptable. So Republicans are left to use estimates like the study from MIT. We took MIT's estimate of a key cap and trade bill from the 110th Congress, co-sponsored then by Senator Obama, because the emissions targets of that Senate bill track the emission targets outlined in the president's budget. We took MIT's own number, $366 billion, divided that by the number of U.S. households. We assume about 300 million people, average household size of 2.56 people. All right. We use that formula, you get roughly $3,000 per household. Using current census figures, you get $3,128 per household, using MIT's own numbers. And why are we using that? Why are we doing this calculus? Because we don't have any numbers in the bill. The American people have a right to know. They have a right to know what the price tag is on the plans of this administration and this majority to raise a massive national energy tax in the name of climate change. And we urge them with all deliberate speed to cease and desist any further progress on cap and trade legislation until they put the numbers in the bill and leave aside Republicans in the Congress, until they give the American people the opportunity to count the cost. You know, the old book tells you before you build a tower, before you go to war, you count the cost. The American people deserve the right to count the cost on the cap and tax legislation that is going to begin to be considered this week. And they deserve nothing less. So with that, I'd like to yield to a new member of Congress from Texas, distinguished gentleman, Mr. Olson.